Saludos and salutations, Broncos country. Welcome to another exciting episode of Broncos Talk. I'm your host, Adan Diaz, and I'm joined by my co-host to my right, Richie. Richie, how are you today, my friend?
Not bad. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much. I do hope you like the new intro. I'm still trying it out. So, guys, let me know in the comments, or if you're listening to us after the fact on audio, if it's to your liking. I've been practicing it a couple of times all week, Rich. So hopefully it sounds good.
Oh, you mean the lead into the show there with when we first come in after the video, yeah?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, you nailed it.
A little bit of Latino and a little bit of English. So, it's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily need me to start spitting into French yet, but I guess if I need to, I will.
In due time, my friend. But anyways, Broncos country, we are a fan-based, fan-led podcast, and we are here to bring you up-to-the-date Broncos news as it's happened during the last couple of days since our last episode. If you haven't caught our last episode, we had superfan Sean Moore of the Cincinnati Bengals on the show, so make sure you give that a like and check it out after this podcast is over with. But in today's episode, Rich, we are going to talk about Drew Locke, our current quarterback, who was kind of at the forefront of the big news that came out last week when it was said that the Broncos players were not going to report for OTAs starting yesterday. But one of the people that showed up yesterday was Drew Locke. So in today's episode, Rich, I wanted to get your thoughts as well as our live viewers' thoughts on what exactly this means in terms of what the Broncos are projected to do next week in the draft and what Drew can kind of do to try to kind of get back on the good side of management should the Broncos decide to, move up in the draft and get another quarterback.
Right. So I'm not sure if you remember one of the things we spoke about I'm not sure if it was last week. No, it wasn't. It might've been last week when Sean was on. By the way, shout out to Sean. I just want to say thank you again for coming on. Mm-hmm. It was an absolute pleasure. And we do hope to have you on again, particularly right before or right after we play the Bengals. I think it'll be an amazing experience for everyone to have a super fan come on in those types of games. Kind of one of the things that sets us apart a little bit. I said this earlier. It was either the pod with Sean or the pod before that. When we first heard the news, when it came to McManus coming out publicly and the Broncos leading the way when it came to not showing up for the voluntary, keyword there, voluntary off-season program at this point. The one thing that we all had to be mindful of is the fact that some of these players were likely going to cross the picket line, so to speak, because of the fact that they had financial incentives in their contracts that made it worth their while to doing so. Drew Locke happens to be one of those players. If memory serves me correctly, and anyone in the comments, please interject and let me know if I'm off on my numbers here. I believe Drew Locke had a $75,000 roster bonus in his contract if he showed up for the offseason workouts. Mm-hmm. And frankly, who's going to turn down $75,000 for going in and doing what you're probably going to need to be doing in the offseason anyway?
That's correct. And before we go any further, Rich, let's say hello to our viewers that are watching us live. Travis Burley, welcome, my friend. He says, "Let's go Broncos." And he follows that up with a question. Are we drafting a quarterback? So before we get to that question, let's say hello to other people that are here in the room. Mohammed Badri,
hey, Mo,
Royal fan. Thank you so much for tuning in, my friend. Raul Flores, he says, "What's up? Saludos." Mahai salute to you, my friend. And going back to Travis Burley's question, as he asked, are we drafting a quarterback? And Rich and I talked about this just before we went on the air, Travis. We do believe, and we both agreed on this, that everything that scouts and the NFL teams and what have you has talked about the draft has all been the smokescreen, and it's going to continue to be a smokescreen. So it doesn't really matter what you see here going from now all the way up until, the clock starts to count down for a certain amount of teams. Anything can happen. That's what so many people love about the NFL draft is that, expect the unexpected type of thing. And so far, it does seem like Denver could go and get a quarterback if they feel the need to. There's been supposedly rumors that George Payton has been talking with the Atlanta Falcons about possibly moving up. So I do think that, Drew Locke is trying, and like I was saying just before when the show started, that I believe that Drew Locke is starting to try to build like a repertoire and saying like, okay, just in case the Broncos go and draft a Trey Lance or Justin Fields or a Mac Jones or whoever, any one of these up and coming guys, he wants to show them that he can be the head dog because he's only going to get one more chance. He cannot go out there and pull out the same Drew Locke that we saw last year. He has to be better. He has to show that he's learning from his mistakes. And he has to know that if it doesn't, then whoever gets picked behind him is going to have a chance to be the man in Denver.
Right. I mean, as much as I've been a bit of a naysayer when it comes to some of the what I will refer to as excuses. However, I think there is at least a modicum of truth to some of it. Ivan, how are you doing? Thank you for joining us. Is when we moved away from Rich Scangarello, or Skangs, as I like to call him, because I'm going to mispronounce his last name more often than not, is you basically took away what Drew had clearly shown that he could do well in. And in my opinion, the Scangarello offense was actually better fit for Drew Locke than the Pat Shurmur offense. And we actually saw Drew Locke really, really, really struggle when Shurmur attempted to completely open his playbook and not modify his offense for Drew at the beginning of the season. Then as we saw the season progress, we saw Shurmur very slowly, I might add, change his offense and slowly but surely modify it to come back to some kind of modest hybrid of what Shurmur likes to run. And then he also pulled in what is effectively the Mike Munchak offensive run block scheme with the pulling guards. So I think we saw what better works for Drew near the very end of the season. Drew looked like a more competent quarterback at the end of the season. And are we going to draft a quarterback? Well, this is really the $1 million question. And in my opinion, the Broncos will have to have a certain quarterback who probably falls to 4, where George Paton says that's the guy I wanted. And that would probably be the only way that we would draft a quarterback this year. And even then, I'm not even so sure that George Paton wants to do that. And I'm only going off of what George Paton has said. In his original presser, he said he wants to build the trenches. Well, you aren't building the trenches when you draft a quarterback in the first round, especially considering, traditionally speaking, the best players that are in the trenches generally come from rounds 1 and 2. And if you even round 2 is a 50-50, roll of the dice.
Well said, my friend.
Or flip of a coin.
Raul Flores comes in and he says, Green Bay got a quarterback and look what Rodgers did. Not saying ours will be MVP, but he might show up. And that's actually a pretty good point he makes here, Rich. Like I said, I'll even go back further. When the season began, I was the one that was, especially during last year's offseason, I was saying that, Pat Shurmur wanted Drew Locke when Pat Shurmur was the head coach in New York. But unfortunately, the GM overrode his decision to get Drew Locke, and instead they went with Daniel Jones. So I thought that, this was going to be a matchup, for the ages. I thought, here we go. He got his guy. He's not a head coach, so he doesn't have to worry about, offense and defense. He can just concentrate on making Drew Locke a better quarterback. But unfortunately, that whole season just kind of ended like, a pie to the face, like in one of those Three Stooges shorts. And it kind of made me miss what Drew Locke did with Scangarello towards the end. So going into further, what we saw and what we're seeing in Drew Locke, let me rephrase myself, is the fact that, like I said, he showed up on Monday on voluntary OTAs, and he's trying to show the front office that, kind of like just don't give up on him should the Broncos go out and get another quarterback. Now, I'm not saying the Broncos will or will not. I'm not a college football analyst, so I can't tell you which one of those quarterbacks is better than the other. I just hope that, so far, I think that George Paton has done a pretty good job in free agency in terms of his acquisitions. The Ronald Darby length of contract is kind of iffy for me, but if he can provide a gameplay that he did last year when that defense, and if our front line can be just as dangerous as that Washington D-line is, then Darby should be just fine. But regardless, I think that Drew Locke has really little room for error because every single pick he makes next season is going to be that much magnified. Every single bobble snap, every fumble, every sack, all that. We need to see him clear up his mistakes if he not to have an MVP season, which it would be great. Don't get me wrong, but if he can just get this team up and running, it would go a great length for him.
So I was actually listening to some really, really solid analysis today. There's a video on YouTube I watched. I might actually share it on Twitter later on this after, once the pod's done. It was really super, super well done. I thought the gentleman that analyzed the whole Drew Locke scenario actually did a very, very good job of breaking it down. Drew in his college career has had not so dissimilar circumstances to what he's had so far in his NFL career. And that is the fact that he's had multiple offensive coordinator changes. He's even when he came from college to the NFL, he worked with Jordan Palmer, and they made some pretty substantial throwing motion changes as well, which I thought was a really interesting take and something I actually went back later on and confirmed. It makes you can totally see there's a stark difference between one and the other. But when you change an offensive coordinator and an offensive scheme, an offensive look, it also impacts what the defense is going to show you as well. So when you have a young quarterback who's trying to get a better handle on what's in front of them, analyzing what's in front of them, part of what helps them in that process is the consistency of the offensive scheme so that they have a better idea of what is being shown, how they should react, what has worked in the past, and they start building on that. Then and only then do you start making those modification changes or those mods to the offense to say, oh, let's throw in this. Oh, let's add in this. Oh, let's add in that. And that's when these younger quarterbacks can then start excelling. Now, if I can go back to that original comment that we had on screen there, I mean, you cannot be comparing Aaron Rodgers to Drew Locke. I mean, one has had a relatively storied career and still holds NFL records in terms of touchdowns to interceptions. So we keep on talking about one of the knocks on Drew Locke is his processing power. I mean, if you're going to go literally polar opposites to that, I'm not quite sure you can find a better processor of the game of football than Aaron Rodgers. Mm-hmm. So I think we're talking about kind of a little bit of apples and oranges here, and I think we need to be very, very careful about comparing a seasoned veteran, future Hall of Fame quarterback in Aaron Rodgers and trying to compare him to Drew Locke. I don't believe that's fair to Drew at all, and I think we need to be very careful with that.
Very well said, my friend. Miguel Santisteban. Hope I said your last name right. Thank you, my friend. Welcome to the show. He says, sup, fellas. If the Broncos draft a quarterback and Drew balls out, would his trade stock rise and be traded? You know, that's actually a very interesting question, Miguel. And I have thought about this. And this is kind of what I was trying to get into before I read your question in the comment section. I do believe that if Drew Locke balls out and has a really good season, and I'm not talking about, like I said earlier, MVP caliber, it doesn't have to be of that regard. But if he has a season where he does enough to save his job, it'll kind of just keep the backup quarterback, if the Denver were to move up one, just kind of keep him at bay. But that would kind of go towards George Payton's favor, especially if the Broncos do move up in the draft and, they sacrifice next season's first round picks and whatever they give up to get said quarterback. So it would more than likely light the fire underneath Drew Locke and say, hey, look, man, there's a guy waiting for you, under you. So if you get injured, and we've seen what happens to quarterbacks that get injured, Rich, it's usually the guy coming in behind him that has a fantastic show. And if that happens, that's pretty much GG on Drew Locke, even if he does come back and get healthy. If the backup quarterback goes out there and puts up a show and, his numbers are good and, people start liking him, it would be curtains for Drew Locke.
Right. So this is an interesting one because this actually, Miguel, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us today. I also want to thank you for this is a great question, a comment question, however you want to word it. It's fantastic. So this actually flies very much in the face of basically anything that's ever happened before. So, and I'm not trying to belittle the question in any way, shape, or form. I think it's a really great kind of thing to think about, kind of pie in the sky kind of idea. So, to date, as far as I can remember, and if anyone else has anything to kind of contradict this, I'm happy to hear it. And frankly, I'm happy to be wrong, is the only quarterback competition that I have seen work, and it was done by accident, that's an important piece, was Russell Wilson and I think it was Hasselbeck, if I'm not mistaken, in Seattle. Okay.
I thought you were going to go the Justin Herbert route, but you shocked me. You're actually right.
I am. It happens from time to time. If you ask my wife, it happens almost never. My wife says never. So in terms of that, but so when you look at because remember, Justin Herbert and Tyrod Taylor, they were never actually meant to be a quarterback competition. It was meant to be a mentoree style role. When Tyrod was brought in, there was never meant to be this like direct competition between the two. And that was in large part just because Herbert was taken so early and he was seen as such an elite prospect coming out of college that he was always meant to be the starter. Now, to go back to my original comment on the Wilson Hasselbeck piece, that was literally an accidental competition that ended up working out. Oh, you're right. Sorry, it was Matt Flynn. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're right. So I got the names wrong. Scenario correct, names wrong. It was Flynn. You're absolutely right. And if I'm not mistaken, they paid Flynn that offseason when they drafted Wilson. And I think that they were actually thinking that Wilson would be kind of the eventual starter, but not like right away. And Wilson literally just absolutely killed it all the way through all the training camps and stuff. And they basically said, we can't hold this guy back anymore. And then they named Wilson the starter like then and there. And then Flynn was gone. Right. So my point here is in most quarterback competitions that are intentional, and we need to look no further than our own team to see what ends up happening when you have a quarterback competition, Paxton Lynch, Trevor Siemian, et cetera, typically what you end up with is a quarterback that is constantly looking over their shoulder. And I realize that the hope of fans is that no, the true competitor in Drew will come out and the lion will roar and tear across the football field and make all opposing teams cower. It just doesn't work that way, generally speaking. More often than not, you basically put fear into the quarterback and then they start overthinking situations. And when they start getting into their own head, which is inevitably what ends up happening, and history has proven that to be true, is that they end up making those mistakes and you basically end up with the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is the guy you're trying to push fails. And then what normally happens actually is then you end up stifling the growth of the guy that's behind him. So you end up killing two quarterbacks with one attempt.
Very well said, my friend. And going off to the next question, which is from Travis Bruley. He says, would you bring in new coaches next year? This is something that I believe we've talked on the Mile High Roundtable, Rich, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't
Brought
remember.
it up here too.
Yeah, and I think it was brought up here as well. So, I mean, me personally, I really love what Vic Fangio has done. I mean, he's not an offensive genius by any sort of the imagination, and he has made rookie coach mistakes. However, the fact that he was able to do what he did by scraping up a defense the way he did last season with literally duct tape and, living on a prayer, playing every time the defense hit the field. I mean, that's just beyond amazing. So the only way Vic Fangio loses his job next season is if the Broncos totally tank, if they don't win any more than, I want to say 3, maybe 4 games. And then they lose the rest. But in order for that to happen, I mean, knock on wood, the defense, stays healthy, a lot healthier longer than they did last season. But the defense on paper, it just looks fantastic. And the fact that they're going to hit the field and play at the same time healthy, God willing, is just going to be amazing. So Pat Shurmur is different because John Elway's gone. He's no longer the GM. So, there is no buddy-buddy relationship between the GM, the head coach, and the offensive coordinator. So Pat Shurmur has until, I believe, even midseason. If he doesn't ship it up, he's going to ship out.
I think Shurmur has 4 games. That's my opinion. I think Shurmur will be gone if he puts up what he did before. Just as a reminder to everyone, I could put up some links on Twitter or something like that if we want. But our red zone ranking in the offense in terms of converting red zone trips to touchdowns We ranked 27th. Like 27. So there's 32 teams in the NFL, and we ranked 27th. So I don't know about you, but I consider that failing.
Great. Not gonna lie about that.
I consider that failing, and I think we should, as fans as well, see that as failing. And so that to me, I mean, if there is a seat that is literally on fire right now, maybe with a little extra couple added flames just for good measure, I think it's Pat Shurmur's seat. And I think that's a big. I mean, you may as well just have like a Bunsen burner permanently underneath it, and that's basically where he is right now. Now, I think Drew Locke has a little bit more slack than that, because I think that George Paton, in particular, probably recognizes that changing an offensive coordinator, as well as the injuries that were generally surrounding him, and the fact that all you need to do is look on the field for the first 3 or 4 games and see that Elijah Wilkinson was literally a turnstile on the right-hand side of the ball at right tackle. So I don't care what quarterback you have there. When you have a defensive lineman that basically greets you as soon as you catch the ball and can give you a high five, that's a problem. So we need to change that. And in terms of Vic Fangio, I'm actually even higher on him than I think you are. And I believe one of my fellow colleagues on Mile High Roundtable, Glenn Hauser, shout out to Glenn. Hopefully you do join us at some point this evening. Glenn and I think are in the exact same lockstep kind of mindset when it comes to Vic Fangio. I'm actually a little bit more realistic, I think, in terms of win percentages than what you mentioned in yours. I think Vic needs to improve upon what he did last year to retain his position. So I think he needs to basically be 5+ wins this year in order for him to prove it. However, I do think some caveats will be whether or not we have injuries or not, because I think George Paton is going to be objective in his decisions and his decision-making process, and saying that guy is literally an elite of the elite on the defensive side of the ball in the NFL. And you need to think long and hard before you kick him out the door of your organization, because it's a one-time deal. You either keep him or you don't, and you will likely regret it when you let him leave. So you need to make sure you're sure about that decision.
Very well said, my friend. Raul Flores jumps back in with another question for us, Rich. He says, is it true that he's been working with Peyton Manning? And I believe he's talking about Drew Locke.
Yes, he is.
Yes, Raul. Drew Locke has been working with Peyton Manning. And Peyton Manning has gone on record a couple of times, not just this season, but off season as well, where he's given Drew Locke his blessing in terms of saying, hey, you guys got something here with Drew Locke. You just gotta, you gotta, be patient. You need somebody that can help him unlock his potential. Now, me personally, I do see Peyton Manning somewhere in the future having a role in an NFL team somewhere. Maybe not so much as a GM, but I think Peyton Manning would make a really good offensive coordinator one day if he ever decided to go down that route. And he was kind of right when he gave his blessing to Andrew Luck when Peyton Manning left Indianapolis. And Andrew Luck was a really good football quarterback. Unfortunately, there were other problems with the team that kept him from, ever making it to a Super Bowl. But he could have been up there in that echelon of, historic quarterbacks. Your Brett Favre's and your Peyton Manning's, your Tom Brady's and your Drew Brees's. So the fact that you have somebody like Peyton Manning who you can mentor off of and learn and try to learn to see the defense and read the defense like Peyton Manning did and sneak in a nice Omaha and get an audible that works would just be fantastic and go a long way for a guy like Drew Locke to kind of say, hey, look, it's my 3rd year. I know I messed up last season, but unfortunately, injuries are something that has also plagued Drew Locke in the past. The wrist, the arm, the ribs. That's something else he's got to work on, especially if he's trying to be, one of those quick mobile quarterbacks and scrambling out of the pocket. But pocket protection is something that Drew Locke has got to work on. He's got to learn to trust his pocket a lot more and not always be so decisive and trying to, move left and right when he has plenty of time to throw the ball in the pocket. 100%.
So interestingly enough, Raul, and again, thank you very much for coming in here again. This is a regular occurrence, and super, super happy to have you as a fan of the show. Interesting point there. Manning was the one that initiated that, not necessarily the other way around. And Manning has also come out multiple times publicly, as you mentioned, Don, there, with regards to defending Drew. And I'm actually sharing the opinion of other members of Broncos country here, where I actually think that was Manning speaking to Elway personally, because I think that a lot of the initial push to try to move off of Drew Locke, I think, is probably initially come from Elway wanting to try to get the quarterback position right before he leaves. And I believe that Manning had heard, obviously he's far more connected than any one of us, period, and probably all of us combined in the NFL. So I think he probably heard through the grapevine that there was some potential decisions to likely either move on via trades or even move off in the draft. And I think Manning said, like, slow your roll. Let's come back down to earth. I will step in. And like when Peyton Manning, the Peyton Manning comes in and says, I got this, I'm mentoring him. Considering that some of Drew's major issues are basically Peyton Manning's biggest strengths, I mean, you just say, yes, sir, let's go, right? Like, as a team, like, what, are you going to refuse that kind of help as a team? Like, you have to be absolutely out of your mind to basically tell Peyton to where to go when he's willing to, on his dime and on his time, mentor your young quarterback in an area of his game that he is struggling in. So I just, Peyton Manning did that of his own accord. And I think that was just a message to the team to say, stop killing quarterbacks. Let's work with Drew and let's take him as far as he can go. And I think Manning is also realistic in this sense. If Manning can push Drew and Shula can push Drew, and the offensive scheme, although I don't think Shermer can do much of anything, but if everything can work in Drew's favor and you see major steps for Drew, then I don't think the issue is Drew Locke. Then at that point there, you basically have to look at Pat Shermer and say, you are holding our quarterback back, get out. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's going to end up happening, if you want my honest opinion, and probably what's going to end up happening here.
Well said, my friend. Brandon Gonzalez, thank you for tuning in, my friend. He says, Justin Fields will make the Broncos a playoff team. Drew Locke had a chance. And that's followed up by our friend Raul Flores once again, who says, who asks, is Justin Fields that good? Or is it because of players around him? I don't follow college that much. Well, that makes two of us, Raul. I know that sounds like a broken record. I keep saying it, but I just want to make sure I state it for the fact in case there are people who are listening to us for the first time who are not under that assumption. So Justin Fields had his pro day, his second one, if I'm not mistaken. And the Broncos have seen him, as well as other scouts and GMs as well. So Justin Fields is regarded as probably the number 2 or the number 3 best quarterback in the draft. Number 3, thank you. And I know he's my good friend Mr. Boggins' pick for the Broncos if the Broncos do decide to jump up and trade spots with any one of the teams ahead of us. So, and going back to Brandon, where he said that Drew Locke had a chance, that's kind of true, but I would say that I would hold that statement off until the end of this season, because it really doesn't matter who the Broncos get in terms, if they do get a quarterback in the draft, not one of those guys is going to start ahead of Drew, because Drew still has the advantage of seniority. He's been on the team. If one of those guys comes to Denver, they probably won't see the field unless Drew Locke gets hurt, or if the Broncos have a really huge lead and then, the backup comes in to close the game type of thing. But other than that, if Justin Fields does come to Denver, I mean, I guess that's a good thing. One name that I do keep hearing from a lot of people that they don't want in Denver is Mac Jones.
See, the funny thing is Mac Jones is, and this so on the Mac Jones train, if we're going to go down that route here, the interesting piece is Mac Jones is probably the best fit for Shermer in this draft, because Mac Jones is limited in terms of his physical tools compared to the other quarterbacks that you've mentioned in the draft. I mean, he just doesn't have the arm that Trevor Lawrence has. He doesn't have the arm that Zach Wilson has. and he doesn't have the athleticism or arm of Trey Lance or Justin Fields. So what makes Mac Jones really interesting is Mac Jones possesses the other skill sets that actually make the Pat Shurmur offense work the best.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the fact that you need to throw anticipatory throws to your wide receivers in order to throw them open rather than waiting for them to be open. And that is really what separates Mac Jones apart from, say, a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields, even a Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson often was able to throw to his first read, which kind of separates him from some of the other quarterbacks in terms of some of the people that he had playing for him. So Mac Jones is a bit of an interesting prospect because if you're looking at who fits our current offensive coordinator, Mac Jones is actually probably the best fit. Now, is he the most likely to succeed in the NFL given where the NFL is going, running, mobility, et cetera, no. Just no. But that's not who we have as coaches right now. So if we're drafting for who we have and who's coaching us, et cetera, Mac Jones is probably the best quarterback for us right now out of the others. And you have to think that he will likely not, well, unless the 49ers original take is actually true, and they do take Mac Jones, you'd have to think that he would probably be there after pick 4. And we would potentially be able to get him, either at 9 or trade up to, the 6-ish range and get him anyway.
Well said, my friend. Ivan Diaz, who just happens to be my cousin. Thanks for watching the show, Primo. He asked us, considering Drew Locke is your 2021 starting quarterback, where do you rank Locke out of the 4 quarterbacks in your division? Based off the ranking, do you think that Denver should roll the dice on a quarterback in the draft on that ranking alone? So I was thinking about this while you were talking, Rich, because I wanted to get a really important answer, but unfortunately I couldn't really think of one. So I'm just going to be honest here. Obviously out of the 4 quarterbacks, Mahomes has a Super Bowl ring. Drew Locke, Derek Carr, and Justin Herbert do not. So obviously Mahomes boy and his Chiefs go number 1. The Raiders, they've always been a thorn on our side. We usually always split 1-1 with them, but unfortunately last season we got swept by them. So I'd put them at 2. And then Justin Herbert, we did split 1-1 with them. He had a pretty awkward first game. And then the second game, if it wasn't for, those really buttery hands of one Jerry Jeudy, that would have been a sweep over the Chargers. So I would put Justin Herbert over Drew Locke. Now, the only reason I'm putting Drew Locke at the bottom is because even though Drew Locke did show flashes in the pan, I don't think that was enough where it would be like, okay, if it was his first year, totally different story. But when you compare what Justin Herbert did in his first year versus what Drew Locke did last year, it was, night and day. So just on that alone, if it was still John Elway, no doubt about it, there'd be no talk about, getting another quarterback, especially if one fell at number 9. But since this is George Payton's show now, if he does go up, just off of what we saw last season, I think that would give George Payton enough reason to say, hey, look, it's not that I don't believe in you, Drew, but I want some insurance, or I need something to show me that if you get hurt or if you have another season like you did last year and we decide to move on from you, that we at least have a really good guy playing that's going to take over this team behind you, since next offseason's football or college draft for quarterbacks doesn't look that good.
Basically, my order is Mahomes, Herbert, Carr, Locke. And even some of the backups on some of the other teams in our division, I think Taylor's a bit of a stretch, because I think Taylor, like Tyrod Taylor, has shown he likes to hold onto the ball a little bit too long in certain circumstances, certain scenarios, and when certain things show themselves like that on the field, which I think can lend himself to getting sacked when he doesn't need to be, or having to just throw the ball away when he doesn't need to. And then I was never a huge fan of Mariota. For whatever reason, I just never liked him. I just think that he liked to run rather than kind of like properly read the field and kind of do all those sorts of things. So
Mhm.
I would probably put Locke fourth, even though I know there's some sound arguments that others might like to make, based on certain statistics, where, technically speaking, depending how you rank people, Locke could be sixth. But I don't believe in all of those metrics, because I believe some of the context matters in some of those metrics when they're being measured. So I put Locke fourth. Now, what does scare me was the performance that I saw from Herbert last year. I mean, I made it a point after I saw him play a few games to actually try to watch the Chargers play. Herbert is scary because he was never supposed to start. He was always supposed to sit. Everyone said that he didn't have it. And he literally came out and he looked right up there in that top grouping-ish of quarterbacks. And then every once in a while, he would make that rookie mistake that said, oh, yeah, I guess he is a rookie.
Yeah.
And that scares the bejesus out of me because having that type of composure and being that young and having the arm talent that Herbert has, that really, really needs to make us start to think about a proper offensive scheme that allows our skill position guys to do better.
Yeah, and before we move on to the next question, let me just add that I do hope that with Anthony Lynn gone from the head coaching job with the Chargers, that I do hope Herbert regresses in terms of learning with Brandon Staley, because Brandon Staley is more defensive coordinator-ish than offensive coordinator-ish going into that head coaching job. So that's just my perspective. Miguel coming back in. I do apologize. I called you Mike. He says, what are your thoughts on Gordon's comment about being overlooked? I think he needs to quit fumbling and rush for 1,500 yards before he makes a comment like that. You know what, Miguel? This is actually we did address this before on a previous episode, and I totally agree with you. He was so close to even getting close to 1,000 last season, and unfortunately, he didn't do it. So to me, I think that Melvin Gordon is trying to kind of get on the front office's good side, seeing as he's going into his second year, and the guy who brought him on to the Broncos isn't no longer in charge. So, that's kind of like how I took it when I read that. So he really needs to go out there and ball out, because now we don't have that, unfortunately, that combination with Philip Lindsay anymore. And whoever decides to play behind him is if it's Freeman, or if the Broncos get, somebody in the draft and, maybe another undrafted running back and they turn out to be a gem. I mean, anything can happen with the running game. But you're totally right, Miguel. Gordon has to go out there and he has to show us that, yeah, the Broncos are probably overlooked or what have you, but it doesn't hide the fact that you had the ball all those times, and all those times you fumbled it, 4 times. And for the money that they're paying you, you should not be fumbling the ball at all.
Well, and I think it's also important to compare him to Philip Lindsay. I mean, that's fair. They were on the same team. They played the same position. And Philip Lindsay, did he fumble once?
No, I don't think he ever fumbled as a Bronco.
Right. So you're comparing Melvin Gordon, who, like, in his first season with the team, fumbled 4 times. And you have Philip Lindsay, who you can basically rest assured that as long as he has 2 hands on the ball, at least one of those hands is staying on the ball. Right. And so I think that's an important thing to call out. And so if you're going to make a comment like I'm being overlooked and people are sleeping on me and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's fine. Really what you need to then do is you need to go out and show that you are worth the contract that you were paid. And you need to basically show out. And if you do, I will be the first person there cheering you on. However, if you don't, then I hope that someone in our chat pulls that comment back out and says, hey, Gordon's fumbled for the 5th time this year and he's not looking particularly great. And then I hope someone pulls that comment back out and I'll slam him for it. But at the end of the day, I don't want any of our Broncos to do poorly. Even, Pinot Grigio himself. I want all of our players to do well, and that includes Gordon. So I want nothing more than Gordon to go out there and go 1,700 plus all-purpose yards and put the Broncos offense on the map. The thing is Gordon has been known for fumbling, and that is exactly why his former team did not bring him back, based on all of his, like, he showed them what he does and what he can do, and they said, we're good.
Yeah, let's not forget his infamous 2019 holdout where he was trying to make the Chargers suffer and pay for the fact that he wasn't going to be on the team, and then he came back on the team anyway and played. But we're going to move on to our good friend Shadowjacker Rich. He joins us. Shadowjacker, welcome.
Hey, Shadow, how you doing?
He says, Denver's roster looks so sweet on paper, it's giving me the sugar diabetes. How high? Mile high. And, I'm not going to lie to you, man. On offense and defense, it looks fantastic. And after this draft, Shadowjacker, it's going to look even better. We just have to hope that all the, cogs and what have you fall into place and we can get the show on the road.
In my opinion, we have a few glaring kind of, I don't want to say needs, but areas that we need to focus on. And then I also think there's some underappreciated needs that we have on the roster, given our aging players. So I think once we get past the draft, I think, in my opinion, what we're going to see in this draft is Peyton in charge or is Elway in charge? Because we've seen what Elway's drafts have traditionally been, and they haven't been particularly great. They tend to go for flashy rather than functional. And I think we need to start seeing more function than flash. And I think that's important, because as a football team, we need to get back to the grit. What made the Broncos so good when, in the glory days, so to speak, was we were a very gritty football team. And you hear players like Mark Schlereth, who I swear he and I had probably had very similar upbringings, because some of the comments that I hear make that, like, my dad used to always say this. I was like, that's funny. I think our dads might have gotten together and used, like, sharing quotations with one another. So I actually think that we need to get back to some of those things, because what makes our environment at Mile High so unique is the fact that when you choose to play a gritty, grinding play style, it makes it very, very difficult for opponents when they come into Mile High to succeed, because you have been conditioned in thinner air. Mm-hmm. And if you really grind and kind of push on the other team and force them to work more, you do really well. And I think that's part of the reason why we almost beat the Chiefs, even though, based on our injuries, we had no business coming close.
Oh, that's very well. That's actually true, my friend. We go back to our friend Travis Bruley, who asks us, what rate do you give Tom Brady? I guess that would depend on what you mean by rate. Are you asking what rate do we give him just in the Super Bowl, just during the postseason playoffs? I mean, if you can be a little bit specific, but I'm just going to tell you from what I saw just in the Super Bowl, I think he really played a really good game. And as much as I didn't want either one of those guys to win, neither Mahomes or Tom Brady. But unfortunately, there has to be a winner, there has to be a loser. So he went out there, his defense did what they were supposed to do. They shut down that Kansas City offense, which is something that no other team has done all season, not even the Broncos, who've been, giving them, have come so close to beating. Oh, he says overall. Okay, well, overall, he did have his ups and downs. He started really bad against the Saints, and then he got destroyed when they played each other again. Tom Brady's probably the only two worst games he had, if I had to say, would probably be that second New Orleans game, and then the NFC Championship game. And I mean bad in terms of his numbers. Obviously in that Saints game, the entire team got destroyed. But in that NFC Championship game, Rich, if it wasn't for that defense, who knows what Aaron Rodgers could have done in terms of damage, and it probably would have been Chiefs versus Packers Super Bowl, let alone what the Bucs did in the NFC Championship game.
to your point there, that's why the rest of the team matters so much. Like, so for example, Patrick Mahomes may have proven himself to be a top 1-2 kind of quarterback in the league, but we saw what happens when those protections break down in front of him in the Super Bowl. So when you flip the coin to Tom Brady, my overall rate for him is like probably 25 cents on the dollar, because he's so old that he's got like one foot in the quarterback grave at this point, given the fact that he's of the age he is. You do have to start wondering and questioning, he's been really, really healthy. And I think that's a testament to how well he looks after his body and all those other things. But you're still 43 years old, and you got to think a couple really solid clocks and hits and a breakdown on the offensive line or something like that. You could get hit and clipped the wrong way, and that could knock you out. And I just saw a video earlier today of Albert O, after I think he tore his ACL, if I'm not mistaken, last year rather, in 2020, and he's sprinting already. So do we honestly think that if Tom Brady at 43 years old had any kind of major damage, that he would be able to come back and look like Albert O did in that video today? I think we'd be absolutely delusional to think that Tom Brady could recover like that. Full stop, period. He is not of the age, even with how meticulous he is at what he does. I just don't see it. It is just too high of a mountain to climb if he were to get hurt like that.
Yeah. Going back to, I highlighted the comments from Boggins and the boss, McCreasy, and I'd probably, if it turns letter grade, I'd probably say A-, just for the simple fact that the Bucs were so close to not even making the wild card, but that team was able to find that groove, and they got into it. Brady got into it. That defense came together. Kudos to Todd Bowles for doing what he did and turning that team around and getting them as far as they did.
That's an underrated coach.
Yeah,
he's a severely, severely underrated coach.
Very well. I agreed. Raul Flores jumping back in with another question for us, Rich. He says, will having more fans at games change the playing of our quarterback, whoever it is, this year? I want to say yes, for the simple fact that it's the sound of the crowd that kind of gets these players in a certain mentality. If you're at home, obviously the home crowd doesn't make noise, so the home guys can do their stuff. But when you're facing the away team at home, the crowd is going nuts, and even if you try to audible in with pumping through the speakers or whatever, it's just not the same. And the fact that everybody can hear almost everybody, you can hear sideline commentary, you can hear in-game commentary. So it's a little bit harder for everybody to try to be a little bit more sneaky or devious in terms of audibles, or in terms of, he said mentality or what have you. So I do want to say that if the Broncos can maybe not be at full capacity by the time September rolls around, but have just enough people where the energy of the crowd, if you've ever been to Mile High, it's an amazing, amazing experience. Let me tell you, I've been there once, and the best time I've ever had at a football game. And it's just so amazing being surrounded by Broncos country, and people of different walks of life just coming together for a football game. So just the energy alone is just incredible.
Yeah, my wife and I went there for our honeymoon for a Denver Broncos game, and I actually ended. It's so funny story. I actually went there, and the Denver Broncos cheerleaders were throwing little mini sponge balls, like those like little mini sponge balls you get with Broncos labeled, and so they threw one, and let's just say that they're not football players. And so one of the cheerleaders, I think, tried to throw it at me, and she threw it basically well over my head. And I'm not short either. Thanks, Mike. So I did a one-handed behind the back grab, and I caught it in one shot. And then the guy behind me in the stands was trying to take the little mini ball from my hands. And let's just say that I played competitive contact sports, and I almost pulled him 3 seats forward with my arm. So that was a great game. Mile High Prophet, thank you. Appreciate you joining. Thank you, bud.
Yep. Hello, Mile High Prophet. Raul Flores comes in and he asks us, as we're getting towards the end of the show today, coaching ways, what was different from the Texans game to the rest of the season games? So I believe Raul is asking us the Texans game from the 2019 season. And the obvious answer that I can think of, Raul, is the offensive coordinator. We had a different OC back then, and you saw what we saw. Basically, what Drew Locke learned to do in simulation was what he brought on to try to get going with that Scangarello offense, which is something that Joe Flacco, when he was at the helm, he couldn't do because Joe Flacco is not a mobile quarterback. He's just a guys, give me as much time as you can until I can throw the ball type of dude. He's not a runner. He's not trying to do anything that you need to do. But if you can get some of that groove back and try to incorporate that energy into a Pat Shurmur offense, especially knowing that Pat Shurmur's job is on the line going into this season, Rich, then I think that we can kind of get back what we saw, not just in that Texans game from that season, but what we saw in that Carolina game from last season.
No, I agree. And this is what we saw at the end of the year, right? Is it's almost like Shurmur realized that his run blocking, and I used air quotes there, was not blocking anything. So that's why we started to see that, like I was saying early in the pod here, that's what we started seeing, the Munchak run blocking offensive scheme with the pulling guards and all that sort of thing. And it worked. And that's what really helped Drew out, was that it was a closer proxy to what he had work for him in last year's scheme than what was not working for him in the Shurmur scheme. My dog Bronco wanted to say hi to everyone, and just in case you were doubting me being a Broncos fan, yes, my dog's name is Bronco.
That is very nice for him to make a guest appearance. Andrew Rivera, the name we haven't heard yet on this show. Thanks for stopping by. She says, Locke needs Skangs back. Shurmur sucks.
I agree.
I second that, but unfortunately, Scangarello's time in Denver is up. I know he was dealing with the Philadelphia Eagles front office last season. He's not with them anymore. So I don't know where he is at this moment or where he plans to land, if he even decides to come back into the NFL scene. But I totally agree with you on that one. Vic, jumping in. Thank you for my friend. He says, great stuff as always, guys. Go Broncos.
Appreciate you, Vic. Thank
you. Kind of just to recap today's episode, Rich, Drew Locke, he does deserve another chance. Let me just say that. And if he goes out there and he totally bombs, and we start seeing flashes of what we saw last season, and the Broncos do decide to go after one of those big name quarterbacks in the draft, I feel that George Paton will not hesitate to bench Drew Locke or influence, Vic Fangio to say, hey, look, this isn't working out, especially if we start seeing or hearing that Vic Fangio's seat is getting hot because the quarterback play is not up to par. So I don't expect them to kind of hold back because, like I said, John Elway's gone. There's a new sheriff in town. So if that's the case, that just that's just my take on it.
So if basically the question is who gets what and all that kind of stuff, my take is this. So a few things. One, Drew Locke in college, when he had the same offensive coordinator, which, by the way, he only had for 2 consecutive years in college. His first year was a bumpy roller coaster, and his second year, he put up the best stats he's ever had. And he's only had the consistency in offensive coordinator. This will be the second time really in his college and NFL career, which is this season, assuming that we don't fire Shurmur before the season or something like that. Now, my take is this. If we keep Drew, I think we almost have to keep Shurmur, although I hate the fact that I had to say that out loud because I feel sick almost saying it, because I don't believe Shurmur is the right offensive coordinator for Drew. And I also don't think that our coaching staff has enough slack to fire Shurmur, go through a slightly bumpy road again with another offensive coordinator, and then roll them back with Locke and another OC next year, and I'll keep their jobs. And that's kind of the problem with not having a bit of a long-term plan and kind of a bigger or better vision, because I think that's what we saw with, say, the Buffalo Bills. As an example, when you look at what they did when they had Josh Allen and they had McDermott and they had the offensive coordinator, I think that the collective group of them had a vision. They were going to do this, they were going to do this, and then they were going to do this, and this is why they were going to go there. I think we need to think far more strategically as a team, think far bigger picture as a team, and look to playing to our players, not just our quarterbacks, our players' strengths, and then bring in coaches that make sense, because it's going to be far harder to replace 53 players on the roster than it is to cycle through a coach, especially when you don't have elite coaches in most positions, with the exception of Fangio and Munchak.
Very well said, my friend. And, going back to the boss, McCreasy, who asked me to explain how he deserves it, that's just my personal opinion. Obviously there are no more veteran quarterbacks left in free agency where you can say respectively could start over. I mean, I think the last one that you could have made an argument for was Alex Smith, but he's retired now. So, now that he's gone. And just going from what we've seen from third-year quarterbacks, in terms of the progress that we made, that's why I say he deserves it. Now, obviously, I could be wrong, and I probably might be wrong going into, the third, fourth week of the 2021 season. So if that happens, I'll gladly admit it. But if you bring in a new quarterback that quick, I just don't trust a new quarterback under that Pat Shurmur offensive scheme, whether it's Fields or Mac Jones or whoever it is. I just don't feel that they would benefit. If you bring in a new quarterback, and I know it's been said a lot of times before, you might as well get a new offensive coordinator and, just start from scratch in terms of, finding a playbook and seeing how they work in terms of, is the quarterback mobile? Do they have a big hand to throw and what have you? So,
Sorry, can I just jump in there? So Creevy just brought in another comment here at the very end there. So this is kind of where I would like to kind of bring something else into the table. So my take on this, same question, different take. Does Drew deserve to get kind of kicked to the curb if another quarterback gets brought in? Not for the reasons that you're thinking, because you're thinking on the negative side of it, which is to say, this is my opinion, this is my take. So I don't believe Drew would deserve per se to get kicked to the curb as a result of, he didn't play amazing, but at the same time, our team did him no favors, right? We changed offensive coordinators. In my opinion, we didn't really have an offensive vision consistently through Drew Locke's time here with the team. So it's not like we put a consistency and quality in front of him and then he failed. In my opinion, our team has actually largely failed Drew Locke rather than the other way around. And in turn, Drew Locke is likely now statistically not going to succeed in the NFL as a result of what I believe our team has done. So looking on the flip side, if we bring in another quarterback to 6'10's point, I'm actually of the opinion that we should do Drew Locke a favor and trade him to another team. And I know this may not be what 6'10's opinion is as well, but it's what mine is we should trade him to another team, gain some additional draft capital. And if we are full in on moving on to another quarterback because, we're trigger happy and we want to move in that direction, then so be it. Let's own it. Because what we have seen so far in the NFL is that the quarterbacks that start pretty much right away are the ones that do well and succeed. We've seen Joe Burrow, who started right away. He looked awesome until he got hurt. But that, in my opinion, that wasn't entirely his fault. He basically had a sieve that was sitting in front of him that they tried to masquerade as an offensive line. And then we saw Herbert, who basically started almost right away by accident, and man, did he ever look good. So what we've seen in the NFL recently, Kyler Murray, another example, he showed exactly what we have all been saying we wanted to see of Drew Locke, which is a pretty steady dose of, wow, you're a pretty darn good quarterback in the NFL. And then every so often you said, I knew you were a rookie. Right? And what we've seen from Drew Locke, and I think this is largely on the Broncos in terms of how we've built our offense, put offensive coordinators with Drew, is they are not playing to our team's strength. So what we are now seeing is more bad than good. And I don't necessarily believe it's entirely Drew's fault. But if our team cannot help ourselves from helping ourselves, like to actually help ourselves, then I think we need to move on from Drew Locke, and I think we need to get another quarterback. But that's not Drew's fault per se, in my opinion. I believe that's on the Broncos organization. And given the fact that, the old saying of stuff rolls downhill, that would mean that would go all the way to the top in John Elway, and John Elway's on his last year of his contract.
Well said, my friend. And unfortunately, everyone, that's our time for today. We have to wrap things up. Thank you so much for everybody in the live section today. I'm just going to remember all the names that I remember. The Boss McCreasy, Raul, Mr. Boggins, Shadow Jacker, my good friend Marie, who stopped by. Thank you so much. Ann Rivera, Mile High Prophet, Travis Burley, and unfortunately, anybody who I forget, I do apologize. Thank you so much. Guys, make sure you follow the podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at MHRT Podcast. We live stream every single Tuesday. But actually, let me backtrack there, folks, because next week we are going to be on a very special scheduled time. We will be coming to you on a Wednesday since it is draft week in the NFL. So stay tuned to the YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter pages for more information on when we go live on Wednesday. But we will be joined by MHRT host Glenn Hauser. He's going to be our special guest for that show for draft analysis, Rich. So, guys, make sure you tune us in. Anchor listeners, please make sure you like the show, support it. If you're a monthly listener or anywhere else that the show reaches on audio, please give it a like, give it a follow. Rich, anything to add before we go?
Yeah, so just our schedule is going to be a little bit mishmashed, to say the least, next week. I will be tweeting out updated times and stuff for everybody. So if you want to go ahead and follow me, my handle is right there. I'm getting used to the fact that everything is a mirror image, so I have to go to the right to go to the left. It's
right.
Messes with your mind. Please go ahead and give us a follow on Twitter. We will keep you updated on that sort of stuff. We will have some draft analysis and some feedback and all that kind of stuff. And there's a special episode of MHRT, which is part of the reason for this schedule shuffle, which is going to be, I believe, a mock draft, if I'm not mistaken, with our very own Mr. Boggins and Monsieur Creevy on Tuesday, and then we will be on Wednesday, and then I think we're all the whole gang, I think, if I'm not mistaken, are getting together on Thursday to go over the results. Are we not?
I believe so. But unfortunately, Rich, that's going to be our time. Guys, thank you so much. We will see you all next week.